I'm very happy to introduce your chair to you, Camille Carroll from the University of Newcastle, and she's going to lead us through this panel discussion.
Thank you. It's a privilege to be here and a real pleasure to be chairing this last panel. So as you heard, my name is Camille Carroll. I'm an academic neurologist based at Newcastle University, and I had the pleasure and honour of chairing the steering committee for the clinical validation study. And the amount of work, I had some insight into how phenomenal that was, and to see all the other programmes of activity that have been highlighted today, it's just absolutely mind-blowing. The purpose of this particular panel is now the so what and the what next, really. So the potential for the learnings from Mobilise-D extend across many different domains of activity in different spheres. And we have an expert panel aligned this afternoon to think about those next steps and what it means for their particular sector. So I'll just ask the panel to introduce themselves quickly in Mexican wave style, starting at that end.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Keith Park. I'm from the MS Society, and like most of the panel this morning, I come from a physiotherapy background as well. I'm not sure if that has to be part of the qualifications to be on a panel, but I am.
Hi everyone, I'm Pippa Powell and I work for the European Lung Foundation. I'm not a physiotherapist, so it is not a criteria.
Hello everyone, I'm Liz Bolton. I work for Age UK in the Charity Influencing Division. We're not a disease-specific charity, but we are the UK's leading charity for older people. And I'm also co-chair of the National Falls Prevention Coordination Group in England, and I should declare that I'm also a recovering academic. Thank you very much.
Hi, Doon. My name is Gerard Quinn. I'm the Vice President of Innovation and Informatics at ICON PLC. We're a CRO, so we partner with all the large pharma and biotech firms around the world to execute their trials. So my perspective here today is very much around industry and what industry struggles with and what it has to do and what it has to change. I also have to declare my complete and utter bias. I was part of Mobilise-D, so everything they've done, everything we're doing is absolutely amazing, and it's going to address every problem that I'm going to highlight. So.
Hi everyone, I'm Dalia Dawood. I'm Associate Director for Research from the National Institute for Health and Care Excellence in the UK. So NICE for short. My perspective would be representing the HTA side of the discussion, but also the clinical guideline development, because NICE also involved in clinical guideline development. I also wear another hat, which is the IMI project researcher hat, because we were part of the IMI NeuroNet, which was a coordination and support action supporting all the neurodegenerative disorders projects, including Mobilise-D. So it's great to see the progress that has been made so far. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Diane Stevenson. I'm the Executive Director of the Critical Path for Parkinson's Consortium, which we have generous support thanks to our launch with Parkinson's UK many years ago, and now we work with so many different industry firms, academic leaders, people living with Parkinson's, and the FDA and the EMA. And CPP is one of many consortia of Critical Path Institute, a nonprofit organization that receives generous funding from the FDA to qualify and achieve regulatory endorsement of drug development tools across diseases of unmet need.
Hi there, I'm David Dexter. So I'm the Research Director at Parkinson's UK, and I'm a neuropharmacologist by training.
So thank you very much. So we'll kick off with a couple of questions just from those different perspectives. So what are the main gaps, or thinking forward as to where the real benefit of Mobilise and the impact might be within your area of activity? What are the remaining gaps, the main gaps in order for this to be implemented, and how might those be addressed? And Garen, why don't we start with you?
Yeah. I suppose part of it comes down to the level of expertise and knowledge that's within industry around the use of DMOs within clinical trials. When I look at the work that Mobilise-D has worked on over the last 5 years, and the body of knowledge and skill that it's built up around how to actually factor in the use of a DMO into a trial, coming within industry, that knowledge just isn't there. So a lot of what we are working on in Mobilise-D is going to, like the manuals we're creating, the body of knowledge we're creating, alone from the actual execution of the study and the data we're gathering, it's actually the body of knowledge of how to use the DMOs in a clinical trial setting is going to be worth as much as the outcome from the actual study, because it's going to educate a lot of people within industry about how to actually utilize them. You know, there's many elements around DMOs, around the selection of a DMO, you know, and aligning that to a disease or intervention area, making sure you're designing the elements in the, you know, in the correct way, making sure you're designing your clinical trial plan and your protocol to factor in the appropriate use of the DMOs. And the work that Mobilise has completed is going to add huge value to that entire story, to educate the industry audience on how to actually take this outcome and actually apply it to a trial. The other piece as well that I think needs to be worked on is, if you look at how we execute trials, the key actors that are at play there, you've got your sites, your investigators, and the most important people, patients. And as you start deploying DMOs and wearables to that space, it's also the understanding and the knowledge actually within the site networks, within the investigators, within the clinical teams at those sites, and the patients. And you need to make sure you're using the things appropriately, that you're not going to build in bias to your trial where an investigator, a clinical team, or a patient adjusts behaviours because they're now having a wearable introduced. So, and I think COVID had one benefit there where in a clinical trial setting, it forced the introduction of decentralized clinical trials, which actually forced the industry to move towards using digital health tech. So that started the journey around the education at the site and investigator and clinical team network on how to use digital health tech. But I think what we've done in Mobilise-D is going to take us that next step to sort of understand how we can apply a DMO to a clinical trial.
Thank you, that's really helpful. So it's gaps at really a knowledge level across the whole piece in terms of trial design, trial delivery, and also, I guess, then in evaluation, as well as the knowledge, the infrastructure and processes to make sure that these things can be implemented. So I wonder, Diane, thinking a bit more about that, and particularly maybe the monitoring requirements and understanding what regulators need to see in order to take the data coming from these trials of the future, what do you think the gaps are from a regulatory perspective?
Thank you, Camille. So I have the benefit of having served as one of the advisory board members from Mobilise-D, and it's been a joy to witness the innovation here in this program and help us learn together, right? The regulatory expectations for how we can get to the finish line, which at first I have to say that the Mobilise team should be very much celebrating these letters of support. We have seen very big impact of these letters across CPATH. We've had 10 of these. But in terms of regulatory expectations, what we're seeing across CPATH, across the programs that are advancing digital tools, and we have Scotty Kern here from our ECOA consortium lead, is that the expectations from the regulators are not that different from non-digital measures. They really want to see reliable, robust, patient-level data from multiple independent sources. And I've learned over the years, having worked in Alzheimer's and Parkinson's, these big longitudinal studies such as ADNI and PPMI were not sufficient to achieve regulatory endorsement. The biggest gap that I see now that I think we can help each other with, because the program I'm leading as well as Mobilise has the same gaps, is having the industry share their experiences from utilizing such tools in clinical trials. We know that there are many examples of this. It's incredibly difficult to see what that looks like and to share the data in ways that the regulators want to have confidence in how these tools use in trials. I think if we can collectively achieve that goal together, we're going to get to the finish line faster, and it's a very realistic expectation that the agencies ask us no matter what type of tool we're advancing forward for regulatory endorsement.
Thank you. That's really helpful. I guess the word that resonated there for me, having also embedded a digital measure in a trial unsuccessfully, was the word robust. That it has to be robust data, and some of the shared experiences that might come from trials where these digital tools have been embedded around ensuring the robustness of the data and the data integrity through the data management pipeline, I think be really helpful. The other element that you mentioned, and of course came out very much in the talks this afternoon, was around the patient level data and for this to be meaningful for patients. And I know that this is something that the regulators are very interested to see evidence. Do you have any comment on that aspect, either you or Ger?
Let me just say that this is one of the examples of how Mobilise-D and our Critical Path Institute program is benefiting and learning together. We were able to have the FDA be part of an advisory group that helped us design this Watch PD study, a very interesting digital measure that captures both motor and non-motor features in early stage Parkinson's, where the agency asked us to bring the patient voice in, and we brought patients in to devise a series of questions that asked how to link the digital measures with what's important to people in their daily lives. This had never been done with this approach before. We had leaders in Jennifer Mayman and Jamie Adams at Rochester worked with the FDA, with patients, with clinicians and the team, and the nonprofit partners as well, to help us do something, again, that now the agency says we want to see this replicated across diseases and in Mobilise, where the patient symptoms, and we shared the data back with patients, which was incredibly rewarding because they said they learned more about their disease from these personal symptom maps. And I think that having that interface and today's lived experience is be part of embedded into the program and part of the regulatory process has been a major jump forward for us and what I think we can do more together.
Thanks, Diane. Judge, have you got another comment, or Liz?
Can I just come in on the meaningful information point? So I've been listening to everybody today, and it's been really great to hear. And it may obviously there's far more to Mobilise than what you've been able to share in a day, and there's far more results than you've talked about. But I guess something that was missing for me today was that yes, okay, so we know that walking is meaningful and it's important for people in their daily lives, but from the patient's perspective, or just the person's perspective, speaking from Age UK, because we don't know people not necessarily with a specific disease, what's the benefit to me in knowing my results? What's the so what? You know, what will I do next? Because I've seen the results, I've seen the DMOs, and I've seen my trajectory or whatever. It's, you know, what does that mean for people in terms of changing their behaviour? Or, you know, can we predict independence? Can we predict quality of life? Things which are perhaps more meaningful to individuals rather than, I know we can predict death. I don't particularly want to know when I'm going to die, but I would like to know what I can do to stay independent, or, you know, to be able to have a good quality of life. And the other thing, the gap or the other thing I wasn't quite hearing today was about how we can reach and benefit people who are not on a specific disease pathway. I know right at the beginning of the day, Lynn, I'm not sure if it was your slide or somebody else's, you'd got sarcopenia and frailty running across the bottom of all of those different cohorts. But there are hundreds of thousands of older people who are not on a disease pathway. My mum, for example, was one. Before she died, she was completely immobile. She was living with severe frailty and wasn't able to eat, but she just kept bouncing in and out of hospital because nobody was looking after her. She wasn't on a pathway. And unfortunately, my dad's going the same way. You know, the only he's on one prescribed medication at nearly 89, so nobody's seeing him, and yet he's on a decline, and his mobility is awful. So how do we reach those people, and monitor them and give them information which would enable them or the carers around them to take action to improve quality of life?
Thank you. That's really illustrative of the... So I guess what I'm hearing is that maybe with what's known about the diseases that were selected for Mobilise, we're just sort of scratching the surface of, and this is the tip of the iceberg really when it comes to chronic health conditions, you know, either conditions themselves or indeed chronic health conditions associated with ageing. And even for the diseases that were considered and evaluated within Mobilise, there are still going to be gaps, things that matter to patients, particularly, Diane, in relation to your last point around what patients like to have the information. We heard this one of the talks, the objective data that empowers people to understand and manage their own conditions. So I wonder, Keith, are you able to tell us a bit about what you perceive the gaps are for your disease area?
I think, first of all, it's a great opportunity, and the opportunities are probably endless in terms of where this project could go and where we could have digital mobilisation outcomes and what we can learn from that. I work more in the policy field just now in terms of how we can look at how people are eligible for benefits, etc. With fluctuating condition like MS, people change day to day, and one of the questions we ask whether somebody's eligible for benefits is, can you walk 20 metres? And that's it. That's the blunt tool we use to choose that. And if you can actually measure how somebody's mobilising over that week, it gives a far greater idea of what they're actually like and how that is and what their need for mobility support is. So the opportunities are endless. And again, from a clinical perspective and my physiotherapy background, I would have loved having something like this when I was practising, because you could learn so much more about people and how they're mobilising and what they're actually doing at home. Whereas generally, and I practiced in Glasgow, and for those of you who know, not everybody tells the truth when they come and see their healthcare professional. So they're telling you one thing, but what they're actually doing is completely different. It's not necessarily relevant. So I think from that perspective, being able to actually see what impact it's having in somebody's life would be huge. But I think potentially one of the barriers would be around compliance and wearing the sensors. And again, I know from the talks that took place earlier on that that was something that's been addressed, and most people wore them quite a lot for a long period of time. But you've probably got a highly motivated cohort of people who are taking part in the study at that point. But when it comes to real life, would that be an issue? And again, people of Glasgow wouldn't necessarily do their exercise programme at that basic level. So if it was something that's going to catch them out, would they be doing it? And I think, is the point that was made earlier on, giving the feedback that's relevant to the individual and actually targeting what is it they would like to find out from this, making it as relevant to the individual as possible will make it more viable for them. And again, I think Professor Sharrock's talk this morning, I highlighted what people with MS seen as the priority for their mobility and what aspects of it was, and it wouldn't necessarily fit with the 6-metre walk or timed walking tests. It's actually how safe am I and what does that mean for me in everyday life. But again, I think the potentials are endless. And with one real-life example, there's a drug called famprine where your eligibility for it's measured, it improves walking speed. And I was part of the Scottish Medicine Consortium conversations around whether that was approved or not. And the quality of life measurement tool that was used for that was so blunt, it's like it couldn't actually pick up the differences in what changing walking speed meant for somebody and how much that would reduce the amount of energy that they were using, what impact that would have on other aspects of their life. Whereas something like this and measuring over a period of a week would show quite clearly that that drug was, or how effective that drug could be for that individual, and would make some of those processes much more straightforward.
Thank you. So that's a nice spread of, or broad spread of unknowns, really, that in order for these measures to be impactful in care pathways, I guess from a potentially a regulator point of view, like NICE, to understand what the compliance would be like for use, and then understanding how much those address individuals' own priorities. Yeah, thank you. Pippa, what about COPD?
So I'm not sure I've got huge amounts more to add, but I think the first thing to say is congratulations to the project on the patient involvement. I had the pleasure to meet Dominique here today, who's a patient we've worked with a lot in the past, and she was very, very complimentary, Alison, about the involvement, and she's one to critique, aren't you, Dominique? So it's obviously good if Dominique's happy, so that's great. I think from our experience with COPD patients, working with them at the European Lung Foundation, We know movement's so important to them. We know some of the factors that are used to measure their disease severity, like FEV1, etc., are meaningless to them and actually really frustrate them because all they want to know is, they want to measure themselves on their ability. So I think the excitement around the potential for patients is great, and you can see that in the patient group involved in the project. We've heard from several people on the panel and from the regulatory work that we need to make sure that those patient outcomes are meaningful. And I think that's a bit of work that really needs to be done, reaching out to a much broader range of patients in the different disease areas. And as great as the PPI is within the project, we know, we're not reaching. There was a great poster on hard to reach patients, and we know for sure we don't work with typical COPD patients. So how can we be broader brush with the patients that we communicate with and discuss these issues with, and making sure that it's meaningful? I totally agree that the end goal should be giving feedback to patients. We know there's a lot of really proactive patients who monitor their data. We've got a fantastic patient who, in the run-up to his lung transplant, was testing his own FEV1 every day, being able to have really positive, proactive interactions. So having mentioned that to Thierry and Judith, that I know it's a long way away, we're only looking at clinical trials for now, but really trying to envisage that end clinical usage for patients, I think, is really important. So.
Yeah, thank you. It always surprises me how much crossover there is between, what on paper looked like very different disease areas, at least for neurologists. So COPD would be well out of scope, but actually there is a lot of parallels and crossover. And in Parkinson's world, which I'm much more familiar with, patients, there are lots of apps and devices for patients to monitor their condition. They get feedback from those apps and devices in a way that may or may not be helpful. So I'm wondering, David, what your thoughts are about what you've heard today and where you think the implementation might lead, what that might lead to in Parkinson's, and any gaps remaining.
Yeah, thanks very much. I think regarding the gaps, first of all, I think it's showing that this device, the algorithms are actually sensitive to change. So we need to have these devices inserted into clinical trials so that we can actually demonstrate that they're actually sensitive to a drug that's actually slowing Parkinson's. And I think as funders, particularly as a global initiative with all funders around the world, that we should be ensuring that digital devices are actually anchored into clinical trials so that we can collect that data. And that would be vital for getting the final regulatory approval. And I think on the digital devices, it's a bit like the Wild West, isn't it? Particularly in Parkinson's, there are so many devices out there, claiming different effects and things. And but if Mobilise had a patient-facing aspect to it, it would actually be fantastic, because exercise is the only thing that's clinically shown to slow Parkinson's. So if there was a patient-facing aspect to it, that would be fantastic, because often they're using devices during their physical exercise, but if you can demonstrate to people with their own data that it's actually slowing their Parkinson's, that would be fantastic.
Thank you. Zalia, I wonder what NICE's position would be on this in order to, I guess, either consider something ready for an HTA process by NICE, or to consider adopting it within guidelines that are being developed.
Yeah, I think the key thing that was remaining, I think, as a gap for implementation for me is how you can demonstrate the value. What was the value proposition here for using these digital mobility measures compared to current practice, if you like? And that's what is the question we usually ask. And to have that clear value proposition, we have to be clear about what we are talking about. Are we talking about the software, which has been discussed as software as a medical device that would have a different route if it is being evaluated, or using the measures as outcomes, surrogate outcomes, if you like? And in that case, you will require other data to be collected to validate the relationship between the surrogate, or to confirm that surrogacy relationship between the surrogate measure and the clinically relevant outcomes. And from an HTA perspective generally, that or agencies that use the approach that NICE uses, which is looking at the cost effectiveness using quality of life as a measure, which is generic measure across different diseases and conditions. It's how that measure, the surrogate measure, actually predicts the impact on the surrogate, predicts the impact on the final outcomes, which are quality of life and mortality, the two critical outcomes from an HTA perspective. So I think what I've seen, and I can't speak, well, I'm speaking on NICE as an organization, because the process will need to be gone through to reach that point. But from what I hear today, I think what we need is really to think about, are we saying that this should be used as add-on to what's being used in current practice, or is it an alternative to other measures that are not as sensitive or as useful that are currently being used? So this would be a key question to answer. Is it an add-on or is it an alternative? And also comes with that, what are the implementation considerations? Because maybe what I haven't seen today is thinking about things like patient education that's required, staff training for its use in practice, cost of the device, the toolkit. All these are considerations that we need to start talking about, and I totally appreciate that the project is focused mainly on starting the journey and talking to regulatory agencies like EMA and FDA, but it would be good to start thinking about these issues from now on and trying to engage with HTA agencies and payers through, for example, scientific advice procedures that could help with thinking about how you can demonstrate the value for whatever element of what we are trying to achieve here, either using it as a diagnostic, using software as a medical device in a diagnostic capacity. This is a complete different program for evaluation, or as just endpoints in trials specifically, which would be then in need of thinking about how we validate these surrogate endpoints and how we link them to these final endpoints or outcomes that will be used in, for example, a submission to NICE, where you have to link them to a decision model. How does that differ? Can we define the cutoffs, the minimal clinically important difference? And in that case, can we define health states in an economic model that would then be based on walking speed or the outcome measure that we are using? So I think, first of all, clarity about what's the value proposition, how it's compared to current practice, and what are the resource use attached to using them in practice to be able to start thinking about the value assessment.
Thank you. So it feels like when you're going up a hill and you feel like you've got to the top, only to go over the brow and then see the enormous great mountain that you're now faced with. So there's clearly a lot still to be done. So what I'm hearing is we need more studies, more trials, more data to try and inform some of these decisions, whether it's used in trials or care pathways. Every use case is going to have its own evidence base to support its use, thinking particularly around those implementation requirements in the real world, the training packages, the user interfaces, the support packages, where they can add value, whether it's for the investigators, whether it's for the patients. But now we've got these fabulous DMOs, and we're thinking about how we are going to use them in our, the next study or our next service redesign project. What would be your top tips, I guess, from what you've heard or from previous experience where you've tried to do this, to do it better? How can we turn our previous pain into future gain? Anybody want to kick off with that?
I suppose I'll go on a bit of a rant. If we look, we're moving now to June really, really quickly. We do have the 24-month sustainability piece that's it's going to kick off in July. I always talk in months and not years, because years sounds like it's a long, long time. So 24 months. And if I look at the work that will be left to do in that 24 months, the academia and industry partners have knocked it out of the park on Mobilise-D. They're going to knock it out of the park in those 24 months. I think what we should be doing is, if we reach the end of that 24-month period and we deliver the outcomes from that work, I think we've missed an opportunity. I think what should be part of the remit or goal, and we should have an aspirational goal, to, as part of that 24-month cycle, to identify a interventional trial for each cohort group. We've got the industry partners there, so it should be part of the goal there that we're identifying that. Aspirational to get 4. If we get 1, it'd be great. If we get 4, absolutely amazing. And very much it's the sort of the land of the brave. At the end of that 24 months, do we have a industry partner that's willing to take over the torch and lead that interventional study on that outcome? I personally believe the best path forward would be to continue in some form of consortium, because I think from an industry perspective, are you going to get one industry partner that's going to be brave enough to take the risk and take it forward, or would you feel safety in numbers? And whether there's an industry consortium that exists post the 24-month sustainability period that is willing to sort of work on interventional trials, because we all know the regulatory authorities, they want data, they want evidence, a bit more evidence, a bit more data, and throw in a few extra trials before they entertain conversations. So that's where I think if we get to the end of the 24 months and we've just completed what our plan is, we've missed an opportunity. We've got fantastic outcomes and we should be trying to drive them through to interventional trials within industry to prove that the DMOs work. Then the regulatory conversation will actually happen.
Okay, super.
Support
from the audience. Yeah, Liz.
So in terms of top tips for the next stage, I guess if you are going to try some implementation trials, I mean, Alison, hats off to you for leading such fantastic PPIE work. You and the board and the group have done an absolutely fantastic job. But I'd say for the future, if you're wanting to involve more people, more different groups, then use your gateway organisations. Don't break your neck trying to identify people yourselves. You know, there are gateway organisations, and for example, Age UK, we have 120 network partners across the UK with local Age UKs who have contact with millions of people. We have 6 million contacts with older people through our advice line every year. I just did a survey on older people's health and care recently. Email went out to our 200,000 strong campaigners list. I got 17,008 older people responding to my survey. And you know, that's phenomenal. As an academic, it makes me sweat, but as a charity worker, I can deal with that. I do the best I can in the time that I've got. But you know, we have huge reach, and we're not the only charity in the UK. You know, there are lots of other charities and organisations, local organisations that represent Afro-Caribbean groups, or the Muslim Council of Britain. You know, all of these charities, all of these organisations have really good reach, and they have trust and respect in their communities and amongst their people. So, you know, use them for sure. And the other thing I'd say was something that came out of the Farseeing project, actually, which a few of us in the room were working on, was also find your local champions, find the people, whether that's on your advisory board or other people who will get really passionate about what you're doing and will use their networks. They'll talk to other people. They'll talk about, you know, what it was like for them, and encourage more people to be involved. And also find your local and national policy levers. So the only thing that the NHS and the Department of Health and Social Care want to talk to us about at the moment is keeping people out of hospital. If your solution, if your intervention will help to stop people from falling or, you know, maintain independence longer, then keep them out of hospital, then that's the way to frame it. But I mean, it may be, you know, in 10 years' time, the levers are different, but you need to find out what those local and national levers are.
Thanks, Liz. So I guess another aspect which has come through strongly today, and particularly through Alison's fabulous work, is understanding that meaningfulness, but not to forget that that meaningfulness has to be a broad piece if this is going to be something that's generalisable across the community. So you mentioned the underserved populations, but also when you were talking before, I want to use the word non-patients, but I don't suppose that's the appropriate word, but for people who aren't known to healthcare, not because they're not choosing to interact, but because they don't have a label of a disease. And certainly within the UK, of course, the ageing population is a priority for government, for policy, and there might be implications and use cases for DMOs outside of disease areas and just in normal ageing. And maybe that's a scope to interact with social care settings, for example, rather than healthcare settings, because most people becoming more frail with ageing might interact with social care, not healthcare. So it's something just to bear in mind. Any other lessons to take forward or key learnings to take forward from anyone this side?
I would just like to echo and thank you for this bold call to action. I do believe there's a huge opportunity across all the programs we lead at Critical Path Institute. We continue to hear the regulatory agencies saying one of the most impactful reasons they like to see consortia collectively come to them is this unified approach of consensus. And if there could be a way, and we'd be happy to help support this through CPP as well, to collectively have multiple different sponsors go in together to prospectively lead interventional study. It's been remarkable to see the enthusiasm from the multi-arm studies you're leading, Camille, as well as the Michael J. Fox Foundation's prodromal platform trials with 20 companies coming forward with their assets. I think this is the time to have this type of call to action, considering all the work and groundwork that you've laid. It seems very timely to pull this call to action, and I think the regulatory agencies would be extremely supportive of that.
Okay, fantastic. Thanks, Diane. David, do you want to comment from?
Yeah, I think with disease-modifying therapies in Parkinson's, we're actually starting to think about introducing them earlier and earlier. And with the new biomarkers and the new staging process that's come forward in Parkinson's, with the biomarkers with 98% predictability, we can identify those people who are going to develop Parkinson's with a high risk of developing Parkinson's. So we need to look at these digital tools in those at-risk populations to see how far we can actually push the dial backwards. And then, because prevention trials are on the horizon, so we need to think about how can we use these digital measures in those prevention trials as well.
Thank you.
Yeah, maybe I can just add something that we're doing that could contribute to the bit around digital. I mean, I was really surprised to hear that there was no objections from the patients or no struggles to get them to use the sensors. And I again imagine that once you go to a broader audience in bigger trials or in the more general population, you may come across them. So we're doing a piece of work with the ERS. They have a Connect clinical research collaboration, and we're really trying to find out what is the perfect way to link the professional-patient relationship when you're using digital devices. So we've done a systematic review, and it's around trust, it's around choice, things like that. So I would say moving forward with using digital devices with a much broader range of patients, perhaps that's something that we can give you some of our learnings on how you can really come through those barriers and challenges and get patients to really engage with those digital devices and use them correctly.
Thank you. That was a really helpful discussion. So I'm just going to summarise the key points. So essentially, many more trials, much more data, many more different conditions, and as I said, not non-conditions, and a massive knowledge gap, workforce training, implementation piece. That'll see you through to retirement, Lynn. So thank you very much, our excellent panel. Really good, great discussion.